Okay, so we now have the mobile 2D template here, and we have the inspector, and we have the different interface of the Unity game engine. So I just want to introduce you to the different parts of the Unity game engine before we go and pursue working on the project. So some parts of the Unity game engine will have the different ways on how you can start the play mode. On the top bottom part of the menu, you would see that we have the play mode that will be allowing you to run your project and test how it works. And we will be having here the pause button. Later, I'll show you how you can maximize the pause button to change the different views of your game. And we also have the step button, which is allowing you to play the game and move it forward one frame at a time, which is going to be useful if you're debugging some parts of your game. Some of the other parts of our Unity interface here will be the project window. So we have the project window that will be containing most of your assets, and it will be accessible if, for example, you are not able to see it. You can just go to Windows and you can look for in here the general, and you should be able to see some of the default tabs that are usually displayed once you create a new project. So we have the project and the project tab here. And you will be able to utilize this especially for working on the different assets. Let's say we have the scenes, and this is the sample scene that we have right now being displayed on our game tab. So some ways on how you can utilize the project window will be to use the, let's say, if I go to the assets here and I just search here, let's say scenes, you would notice that it will be allowing us to search the different files or objects that we may have or assets that we may have in our project. You can also search by type. Let's say I want to look for mesh. So we don't have any mesh yet. Later, we'll be talking about prefabs. You might want to able to, as I've shown you, we can search by the type. And of course, we can also do some label. And you can also you can even save your search when you are utilizing the project tab here or the project window. So another window that you might want to explore is the hierarchy window. The hierarchy window will be displaying the different game objects in a scene. This will include the main camera of your game. You can add models. You can add, let's say, if I create an empty object here, and we can say this is going to be our player. So you'll have your player, your environment, and the different assets that may be available in our project window here. So if I go and we can see here, we can create a prefab folder, for example. Let's create a folder, prefabs. Okay. So, and again, that will be making it a lot easier for us to look for search query if we do it that way. So something that you will be able to notice is that if we have a game object here, we should be able to also see that game object. If I go and let's say I want to have this in our scene. Let's see here. So let me just delete this first. You can delete objects, by the way, also from the hierarchy, or you can go to the scene window. We'll talk more about that later on. But let me just first delete this, and then I'm going to create a 2D object with the sprite, and I'm just going to have it as a square. So you would see, I'm going to say that this is going to be our player. And this will now have different properties that will be available in the inspector tab of our game. And we can manipulate it, move around the scene view in our scene window here in the scene tab. So you can go and sort objects. You can create a parent. You can create children game objects while you're in the hierarchy window. So let's say here I have this player and I can create here, let's say I want to have an animator. So if I go look for, let's have, where is that? Effects, no, let's have an UI. We can have a, let's go add a component, no, let's have another empty object that we will call an animator. And that animator, we will be creating, let's say, animator. Now we have an animator that we can, from where we can put the sprite and we can do animations. So that's one of the purpose. We can group objects inside of the hierarchy window. And in this case, we have a player that will have an animator, and then we'll have some other objects inside of the player that we would want to manipulate or we want to be dynamic. We can try to utilize this hierarchy window to play around and implement the concept of parent-child hierarchies or parenting to group game objects much easier. In this way, we can also implement what we call inheritance, from where we can inherit the different properties of a specific object. So normally, what if you move the parent object here, you will also be able to move the animator. Let's say here, you would see that's our animator. And if I move this here, and the animator is currently in a different location. So just have that in mind. If you move the parent object, you will be able to move the animator also, the child object, as we can see here. And sometimes we'll be utilizing this in some projects, especially if you're going to be working on positioning your player animations. You might see this as one of the tricks that you will be needing for playing around with the animations that you'll be doing with your game objects. So some other parts of our Unity interface here will be the scene window or scene tab that we can see here. So the scene view will be allowing you to visualize and interact with the game object as the same thing that we're seeing here. We can move through the use of the scene view. We can move the different objects inside of our uh, Unity interface or dashboard. So you would see if I press on the control key, I can zoom out, I can zoom in on the scene view, and I can use the different tools that are available for us, like the view tool, that will be allowing me when I press the left mouse button, this will be allowing me to move around the scene and the camera from where I am able to look at where my objects are placed. We have the move tool that will be allowing us to move the objects. Let's say I have here a player and I'll be creating another to the object. Let's say, let's just have again, a square and we'll call this a falling object. Okay, so we'll have two objects. Now we have, let's just change this color to black or something that will be distinguishing it from our, and let's have another object here and let's have a sprite and square and we'll just call this ground and we'll have that ground and we can also rotate. We can use the rotate tool. We can use the scale tool to scale it up. If we're doing the middle part, we can uh, scale scale it with or let's say horizontally and vertically. As you can see, let's just remove the rotate and then let's scale it that way. And we can also use the rect tool. If I move that there, so we have the ground and I can move this down here. And we also have the transform tool that will be allowing us to work with the different tools that we have here. And usually you can also use the key Q, W. As you can see, Q is for the view tool, W is for the move tool, E is for the rotate tool, R is for the scale tool, T is going to be for the rect tool, and we have the transform tool with the Y, which is basically the QWERTY keyboard keys that is very common, especially if you're a touch typist, you might have encountered the QWERTY word that will be referring to the different common keys on the keyboard that you will be working with if you're typing, right? So as you can see, we'll talk more about this different tools here that we have in our scene view. But for now, let's move on to our game view, which will be allowing us to view what is being rendered on the camera. As you can see, I positioned the player. I go back to the scene view here, and that's what's currently getting rendered. Let's say I want the player to be in the middle, and then the falling object, we want to select that. So you will see you can also select the game objects from the hierarchy view on the scene view. So we'll have some objects are going to be falling and we'll be catching them in this game. And if we want to go and in the game view, we can also change that to a simulator view. That will be allowing us to look for the different possible devices that we will be using for testing our game. Let's say I want to look for, let's say I have here a Samsung, let's say S10. So you will see that's how it will look on an S10 mobile device. So this is going to be very helpful, especially if we want to go and let me scale this down. Let's see if we will be able to scale down, or we can also scale from our, and then let's go back to the simulator. We now have that object there, right? Let's scale it up a bit. So we now have that object. If I wanted to scale our player here, scale it down a little bit. We go back to our simulator. Now that looks much better, right? Some other things that you might want to consider if you're working with this will be the aspect ratio. So most of the time you want it to be full HD like that. And if we go back to our simulator, you'll see that's how it's going to be looking. So especially if you're working with mobile, or let's say a desktop computer game or a PC game. So in the game view, you will also be able to see the play maximize. So if I go and play this should be occupying the whole screen. So let's wait for that to load. And as I mentioned, there's a way for you to, when I was starting out, technically, this is something that I didn't know. You can actually maximize the use of the pause option to choose from the play focus, which will be allowing you to view all of the, while you're playing the game, you'll be able to view the different windows so that you will be able to check for possible properties that you want to manipulate, assets that you might want to test, adding. Let's say I have here, let's create a new, let's say, sprite triangle. So, and I wanted this to be created and test it out in the scene. Let me go back to the scene view and we have that now triangle there. However, once we try to remove this, you would see that the triangle is removed from the scene view. You have to add the triangle directly while you're not in play mode. Okay. So this is especially useful for testing out your game when you're working on your projects, the play mode. And again, if you want to view it in a much larger view through the game view here, you can have what we call the maximize option and you just unpause it. And it will automatically show you the full window for your game. And you can switch between those options. Of course, we have the audio, we have the gizmos when you want to draw some way visually to evaluate, let's say, attack attack lines, or let's say you wanted to check for ground check, wall checks. You might be able to utilize these moves. We'll talk more about that perhaps in some other lessons. So some recommendations in the game view, you might want to change that to 16 by 9. And if we go to the simulator, how will that be looking? So you would see there that we can also rotate this that way. So you would notice that's how it's going to be looking. if you fit it to the screen. Rotate and rotate. Simulator. Usually for mobile games, 16 by 9 aspect ratio is what is being recommended. It's widely used for both Android phones and PC gaming. Another window that you might see here, if I go and click on the hierarchy window here, will be the inspector. And the inspector will be allowing you to be able to go and see the properties of the current selection of one or more game objects or game assets. And as I've shown you earlier, we can change the color, the different sorting layer, order in the layer of a specific object in our game. We can also add components to the use of the inspector. So let's say I want to go and create a player script. So let's create a player script that will be, let's go add component, and we can say a new script, and we can say that this is going to be a player script. And that will be creating a script now that is named as player. And of course, we want to organize this, so let's just go and have a folder for scripts. Usually, you would want to have some sort of a hierarchy of different objects in your assets. So, some folders that you might want to create here. Let's create artwork. Let's just have this load. Let me rename that. Right click and then look for the name. I'm going to call this artwork. You might want to have a folder for audio music, okay? And you might want to have a folder for animation. So if you're going to be adding some animations, you might want to have a folder for those animations. And we can have the the object that we have here and here, okay? Inside of the art, triangle, what else do we have? I think we have most of the objects here. And we can drag some of this into our assets folder. Another thing that we might want to look up will be the layout. You can change the how the layout of your windows will be displayed, and Unity has provided us with ways on how we would want to work on our windows. Me, I preferred what we call the tall option, and I usually separate the game view from the scene view. And I usually put that from the bottom here so that I can work much easier. And I have the hierarchy, I have the project and the inspector that will be allowing me to see some of the objects here. And then I can go and work on the different ways I would want to set up my levels. Okay, now that we're familiar a little bit about the interface, let's go work on our player object here. And let's go and have a box collider added to it. So let's add a component and let's have a box collider. Let's have it as a box collider 2D because our game is going to be a 2D type. And we also want to add another component that will serve as the rigid body 2D. And we want to set this as kinematic. So the reason why we're setting it up as a kinematic rigid body 2D is because in game engines like Unity, this is a body type that is not affected by gravity or forces, and it can be moved by script control animation or joints, but will not be reacting to physics like a dynamic rigid body 2D. It's useful for objects where you want to control their movement directly, like player characters or objects that move along defined paths. Usually, we use the kinematic rigid body 2D here set up when we are going to be using it for player characters or we want to control entities because we want to directly control their movement using scripts or animations. If we want to be moving objects along predefined paths, we can also set their position and rotation to follow a specific trajectory. We can also set it up for static platforms or obstacles, and we can use them to create static objects that are not affected by physics. And we can also create ragdoll effects through this kinematic option. You can switch a character from kinematic to dynamic to simulate ragdoll physics when they are getting hit. Now we also want to go and set up here a tag. So we want to tag it as player. So the reason why we have that set up and or let's say this is a string. If you're familiar with data types, this is going to be a string that we will be using as a reference, as a label that will be assigning to a game object, which is the player. This will be allowing us to go and easily reference or interact with our object. So we have here the player object and using a code like, let's say, for example, game object dot find with tag, which is a method, game object, we're accessing the property, which is a method, find with tag, and we have the function invocation operators, then we'll be placing the player string, and that's how we will be accessing that specific object through the script. So this is a good way to categorize and differentiate the player object from other objects in the scene, making it going to be a lot easier for us to manage and manipulate our game logic. So just have that in mind when we use the uh, tag option here, okay, in Unity. Now, the next thing that I just want to do here, let's just save this first. Usually just, I like to save the save and then use the save project just to make sure that I'm saving most of the files correctly. And right now in here, I can already, and we can add a component in our project window. We have our player script already. So we can, one thing that you can do so that it will not be, you will see there's a lock option. If I click on here, that will not be moving anything and it will keep the player object as our targeted object for while we're exploring our different uh, assets in our project window. So I'm just going to go to the player here and ways on how to add numbers of component, you can actually search here and I already have a player script. You will see it's already telling us that there's a player script. So another way is to create a new script or another way is for you to drag the script that we've already created. And we now have that script available for us to go and write our initial code for our player. Now let's try to go and click this and open this up. And let's see what we can try to work on as we try to test our player here. So if you're new to programming, don't worry, we'll try to work on this. And let me just go and delete the start option here. And let's just first do some testing here. So let's have a public float, move speed. I'm going to use camel case and value, assigning a value of 5 float integer here. And in the void update, which is going to be another function or a function, we want to have a float variable that will be assigning the input dot get axis horizontal. And let's end that. C sharp is a bit. So this is a variable declaration, which we know will be a float value. We're trying to access this input class interface, and we're getting this method get axis, and we're uh, tagging it or we're using the string horizontal to give us a way to move our player horizontally. And we want to target the transform property of the player and we're accessing and we are using the property accessory operator, which is the dot position. Then we want to augment it with assignment plus an equal sign with a new vector. Let's have vector 3. And we're going to get this variable, paste that in here, and we'll go give it some more values, which is going to be 0 and 0. And then we want to multiply it with the move speed variable that we have here. And we'll have the time dot delta time. And let's see, will this be doing anything now to our game? So let's go back to our game. So as you can see, we have the transform on the inspector. And if we try to play this, this will be allowing us to go and some notes that we should be aware of. This is like a GPS. This is telling us the position. 7 here. This is going to be telling us the position coordinates of the player in the game world. And if we try to now move this to the left, to the right, you would see we are able to access the transform dot position property of the game object while in the game world. It's allowing us to move, and it's not moving the Y and Z axis of the game object because in our script, we set up that 0, 0 for our vector 3. And this operator here is the assignment uh, plus an equal sign. This is adding to the current position. So we're not setting a new position. We're moving from the current one. We're telling the Unity to shift this player a little bit towards the left and towards the right. And this vector 3 move x is the horizontal x axis. We have the y axis and the z axis. So usually we can see that the move x here is allowing us to move the player from a negative value to a positive value. And if we go to the 0 value, as you can see there, there's no movement that's happening if we are in the middle. Okay. And we are multiplying it by the move speed. If I place 10 here, we can update that. It's now much more faster. If I say 20, it's going to move faster, right? So that's just one thing to take note of, and I think 5 will be good. And time delta time is basically you scaling the movement so its frame rate will be independent. So when we talk about time, that delta time in Unity, this will be representing the time in seconds it will be taking to complete the previous frame. This value is going to be crucial for creating frame independent game logic. This will ensure that game speed remains consistent regardless of the actual frame rate in different types of machine. Fast computers, slow computers, we will be able to have consistent speed across all machines. Now let's try to go work on our falling object here. So we do have our falling object. And what we want to do here is we want to create or add a component. So I'm just going to be locking this again so that we won't be accidentally clicking on other objects. And I'm just going to go look for a circle collider for this time. Take note, colliders can be edited. And if you try to press on the F key while you're on the scene view, just F key, it will be focusing your object that you're working on. And in our case, we can actually see that we can adjust the collider based on the size of the object that we're working with. So, okay, we'll talk more about that as we go along. I would want to add, we have some options here. So we have our falling object. Then we can add a rigid body 2D. And inside of that rigid body 2D, it will have certain values that we can try to manipulate. So for the gravity scale, let's set that to 3. Collision detection, we will be setting it into continuous. And we can add a tag for it as, let's say, let's just keep it untagged. So let's try to see what will happen if we added the rigid body 2D here and the circle collider. Now let's go and try to test this out, and you should be able to see that we will be able to now collide with the falling object with our player. And as you can see, if we were able to go and hit the falling object as it fell, we now have that object on top of our player, and we can catch it, right? And it's falling. So let's set up our ground here. And what I want to do, just take note, if you have this lock, you won't be able to add a tag. Okay. If you unlocked it, you would see if I go back to our tag, add tag, you'll be able to see there a list is empty. And we can say that this is going to be for the ground. And now let's see what would happen if we go look for that. And we now have a ground. Okay, so you would see we have a ground tag that we were able to create by adding a tag. And again, that tag will be a string that we will be referencing for us to be able to easily find this ground object. And same with our falling object, we want to go add a box collider, or instead of a circle collider, we'll be using a box collider 2D. And as I mentioned, we can see that we can try to manipulate that box collider. We go here and we can see that it's occupying the whole space of the box or our ground. As you can see, if I go and select that, there's that color green that you can try to increase or set according to the size of the object. Okay, now let's have to go and go back to our script folder. Let's create a new C# script that we will call a game manager. So that should have created this game manager assembly information. If we try to click on that, we now have another class for our game object, and we have a game manager with mono behavior and void start and void update. So we want to attach that to another empty object that we will call a game manager. So we now can drag that here. We now have our game manager. Let's go write some code inside of our game manager. So let me just go and delete all of this first. And let's have a public static game manager instance, public text, score, text, private int, score value of 0. Then let's have a void awake method. And inside of that, I think I just want to type, I want it to be kept, let's just say void awake. And then let's have an if statement, if instance is equals to null, instance is assign the value of this. Else, destroy the game object. And I just wrote it in this way, but of course you can write it with curly brackets, especially if you're familiar with JavaScript. I think that's the easier way to familiarize ourselves with how this will be written. So we have an awake method. Let's also have a public void increase score. And inside of that, we want to increment the score variable. So we'll have plus plus score text dot txt, assign the value of score. Then we add the value of score. So this should be score text property score text. I think this is not correct. That should just be text. I think that was the hmm. Let's see. We'll try to debug some of this. Let's try to create first here. So what is that error telling us? Text could not be found. Are you missing a using directive? And I think that's the reason why we need to use Unity engine.ui so that we can be able to access that text object. Okay, so that's sometimes you just need to look at the error that you're encountering and you'll be able to find a solution to it. So now let's go back to our game manager here. Okay, now let's have to go and create a UI. Let's have a text mesh flow, and then let's go rename it to score text. Say this is going to be score. Let's go to our game manager and then drag that to our. Why is that not working? Let's go to our game manager. Okay, so I've been doing some tinkering and I was trying to drag. Let me just lock this, and it's not working as you can see. So I think this is because of a newer version of Unity. Normally either uses Text Mesh Pro, and we're using text here, and this is I think the older version. And we should be changing this to Text Mesh. So we can see TM Pro, Text Mesh Pro UGUI, UGUI, or Text Mesh Pro. So let's try this out. So there's two options here. Let's try to choose Text Mesh Pro GUI or Pro GUI and save that. And then let's proceed back to our Unity engine. And now it does show that we now have that Text Mesh Pro UGUI. So let's see if that will work. Okay, so that's there. And let's try to go to Canvas and see if we can reposition this on top left, or perhaps let's have a shift. Let's have this on the, let's see how that will look on the game. Should, so we do have it here. What we want to do is to have it positioned on the top. So perhaps we can adjust it up here and then resize it again like that and adjust a little bit. Perhaps we should also adjust this. And so that's that. And get this one. So we now have a score there. So we can see. Okay, everyone. So now let's try to go and create a falling object script. And let's just right click, create a C# script. Let's have a falling object. Let's try to open that up. And inside of that, let's delete some of the start and update. Let's have a private void on trigger, enter 2D. Let's have a if statement that will be checking for the collision dot compare tag, and then the player. Then let's have a check for the game manager dot instance dot increase score method inside of the game manager. Then let's destroy the object. Then else if we'll be checking for the collision, compare, and let's look for the ground. Then let's go and destroy the object. Now let's try to go back to our Unity engine. Now let's try to test things out. But before that, let's go and have this into a prefab folder. Now that we have that script there, let's go delete this and let's create another object that we will be. So let's have a new object. Let's have a name for that as spawner. Then position it. So let's go have a position just above our player. Okay. So let's have the spawner. Then let's go back to the scripts and let's have a script that we will try to call a spawner. Let's have a spawner. Let's try to open that up. Now let's try to go and set some public values. Let's have a public game object, object prefab, public float, spawn interval, assign the value of 1.5f. Then let's have a public float x range, assign the value 8f. Then inside of the void start, let's have an invoke repeating. Then let's go reference that spawn object. Then let's go and try to have a 1f float value and pass in the spawn interval. Then let's have a spawn object. Let's delete this update script and let's have a void spawn object. And then let's have a float random x random dot range negative x range, which is the one that we have here, and we're giving it an x negative range value and a positive range value. Let's end that with a semicolon. Then let's have a vector 3 spawn. I think that should be 3 spawn position. Send the value of new vector 3 random x transform dot position dot y and then the 0 value. Then instantiate object prefab spawn position quaternion dot identity. Then let's just try to test out and see if there will be some errors in what we have written here. Let's go back to our Unity engine. Let's try to save this and play. So of course we need to drag the spawner. We have our object prefab, which is in our prefab folder. So let's have this spawner and lock that, and then let's go and drag that spawner object, and let's see what that will be doing for us. I think, sorry, I wasn't able to add component, spawner, script. Let's drag the following object. Let's try to test these things or test this out. And there we go. We now have a spawner and we have some falling object, but I think it's not getting destroyed. So I think we'll need to see. But we do have the object spawning and it's not getting destroyed when it's touching the ground and so we'll have to do some debugging, but it does spawn and we can see that the spawner is working. So now let's just go and try to do something here. So let me just go get the calling object again. And then let's go and let's see here. We have the falling object, we have the spawner, And then what we want to do is to go to the falling object and check the circle collider 2D and have it as is trigger. And then let's go back here and let's apply, or in here, let's go, that didn't work. Let's see what would happen if do we need to apply override? That doesn't seem, prefab open, no. Let's first try to test what's going to happen if we add that uh, is trigger. Okay, so that works. And now we have the spawner getting, or I think some of the simulator game. Let's see what would happen if we have it. Oh, I think that's not going to work. And the idea now, we have the spawner. We have, let's try to reduce let me just set here, perhaps 5 or just for testing purposes. So let's have that object, calling object to spawn from that specific. So we're able to add the score. We can get the object and we're adding score, or we have, and I think we can add some power ups and so on. And you can explore further what could be options for you to improve this game. But at least in this session, we were able to cover prefabs. You will see we're creating prefabs are like you are creating a clone, and we're respawning it with the use of the spawner that we have written, the script for the spawner that we have written. And we're just randomizing the appearance of that object. And now we can catch some of those objects. And of course, we can add more features to this. But for now, I'll leave it here. And I hope you learned something in this workshop and you gain some insights on how to use the Unity engine, especially for creating a very basic casual game like object catching another object and adding some scores. So let me know if you want me to further work on this project, and we will be continuing on trying to explore what we can try to implement in as new features for this project. So thank you and see you on our next lessons.